After months of speculation and 1 year ahead of schedule, Manitoba's 42nd provincial election campaign kicked off just over 2 weeks ago. Tonight, the leaders face off in hopes of winning your vote. Welcome to the 2019 Manitoba Leaders Debate. My name is Joanne Kelly. I'm a journalism instructor at Red River College. I will be the moderator this evening, and here is how the debate will go. We have 50 minutes. The leaders have been told about the rules and time restrictions, and each have agreed to respect those. We will start with the leaders asking each other questions about jobs and the economy. Then our three journalists will ask questions of each leader. Next, the leaders have the opportunity to ask another leader a question of their choice. We will end with short closing statements. Now let's start by introducing the party leaders. Progressive Conservative leader, Brian Pallister.
Good evening.
New Democratic Party leader, Wab Kinew. Liberal leader, Dougal Lamont. And Green Party leader, James Bedham. I also want to introduce our three journalists who are here to question the leaders on healthcare, the environment, and crime and addictions. From Global 680 CJOB News, Richard Cloutier. From the CBC, Marcy Marcusa. And from CTV, Jeff Keel. And with that, let's get going. In this segment, each leader can ask the leader of their choice a question regarding jobs and the economy. We drew for order. Brian Pallister will ask the first question. So, Mr. Pallister.
Thanks, Joanne. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in tonight. We inherited a massive mess from the previous government. They had made our debts higher, our wait times the longest in Canada, raised our taxes after promising they would not do so, made us pay more, get less, broke their word doing that. The last election, we said we would be the cleanup crew. We have kept our word in doing so. We promised to fix the finances. Our deficit is down by 80%, and we are going to balance the budget. Really. Repair our services. We reduced ambulance fees by 50%, and Manitoba is the only province to have shorter ER wait times, and we're rebuilding the economy as well. So my question is for Mr. Kinew. Mr. Kinew, you've made a number of promises in your platform. Manitobans know who will pay for those promises. They just want to know how. Mr. Kinew, will you be raising the PST, yes or no?
Well, first of all, let me take a moment just to say thanks for tuning in. Now, Mr. Pallister, I've been talking to a lot of people in this election, and let me say that the PST is a settled issue. It's not going up. This election is about health care. Over and over again, I've heard from many, many people in Manitoba that they're concerned about the closures of the emergency rooms, the cuts to services like physiotherapy, the cuts to cancer care. Again, we've heard about so many cuts that Mr. Pallister has brought in over the past 3 years. And now it's time for us to take a new approach. And that's why I've proposed a fully costed platform that will take a smart, careful, and responsible approach to fixing the damage that has been caused in the healthcare system by Mr. Pallister, but also, very importantly, modernizing our healthcare system so that it will be there for Manitobans when you need it.
Well, actually, Mr. Kinew,
and we are talking jobs in the economy here.
Exactly, but we are also refuting false statements put on the record just now by Mr. Kinew. Our budget this year alone for healthcare is $414 million higher than the NDP ever invested. Our wait times are down, the only province that has lower wait times. The only one, according to the Canadian Institute of Health Information.
That's not what I'm hearing
and ambulance
from
fees,
the nurses
on
the front lines.
Ambulance fees are
Mr.
half
Pallister,
of what they were when the NDP
the nurses
ran.
on the front lines of the healthcare system are telling me they're stressed out. They're telling me that they're seeing their coworkers leave the profession and in some cases are being fired. And they're not raising this with me because they want me to feel pity. They're raising it because they're concerned about the care of the patients. Now we need a good approach.
But going back in time is not the answer. Every other city in Canada has made the changes. Every other city in Canada has made the changes.
In Manitoba, and it's going to
and
involve having more
wait times than we do.
Jobs
people
and
waiting.
Not less.
We've got about 10 seconds left here. So
record waits in Manitoba under the NDP, and now the wait time.
Can we let Mr. Kinew finish his answer?
We've seen too many nurses lose their jobs in Manitoba. It's time we hire them back so that we can improve health care.
Record nurses working, record doctors hired, and record paramedics as well.
We've used up the time for that one. Thank you, Mr. Pallister.
Thank you.
The next question will be asked by Dougal Lamont.
Thank you very much. My question is for Mr. Pallister. There In the 3 years you've been in power, there have been 2 credit downgrades. Recently, there were 2 downgrades to Manitoba's growth projections to be the worst economic performance in 20 years. And one of the reasons for this is the Conference Board of Canada said is that there have been reductions in program spending because education and health have both been frozen for the last 3 years straight, and there are also cuts to infrastructure. So could you please tell Manitobans how freezing wages and firing people grows the economy?
Thank you very much, Mr. Lamont, for your observations. We are leading the country in private sector capital investment since 2016. Investment in manufacturing in Manitoba is the highest among all Canadian provinces. Private sector capital investment in mining, in oil, in gas extraction is the highest in all the provinces. Exports to the U.S. are the best in all the provinces. And so, Mr. Lamont, I just don't share your pessimism about the future of Manitoba. As well, we have stabilized our tax structures here so that we're open for business. We've reduced red tape, and we've seen real success in growing our economy. And we have repaired the foundation of our province to the extent now that we have a fiscal dividend that we can use to exert others to come and invest in Manitoba and create jobs here. We're also ranked as the top tourism attraction of any Canadian province right here in Manitoba. So we have potential galore. As we move into our 150th birthday party next year, we're going to have a lot to celebrate together.
Well, I would say I'm surprised that you mentioned tourism because your government failed to put a dime into fixing the railway to Churchill. But part of this is also there have been a huge number of delays in funding that was supposed to be spent in Manitoba. For example, there were $400 million for healthcare, $400 million for housing, and another $1.1 billion in infrastructure spending that was held up for more than a year. So can you explain why it is that it took so long for these deals to be signed and why that money hasn't flowed into the economy when it could have been spent more than a year ago?
Well, Mr. Lamont, your observations are flawed. We actually have exceeded, in terms of critical infrastructure investment, the investments made by the previous NDP government in 15 of the 17 years that they were in office. So we're continuing to make strategic investments in our infrastructure and in our economy that will work.
Well, I would note that
provide job
you've done that by
redefining
families. By redefining infrastructure.
Not at all, sir.
$1 billion in core infrastructure, and then you threw in health and education into that as well in order to pad your numbers. Because the evidence is clearly there that when it comes to roads and highways, that there were massive cuts, that there were commitments.
And we've got about 10 seconds left.
Thank you very much.
I can only say, Mr. Lamont, repeating a false statement doesn't give it any element of truth. And the fact is we've exceeded the previous government's investments in 15 to 17 years. The only 2 years they exceeded our investments were just before the last election when they were desperate to buy votes. We aren't going back to crazy land. We're going to invest strategically. We're going to build our infrastructure intelligently. That's what Manitobans expect from us. That's what we'll do.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Lamont. The next question will be asked by Wab Canoe.
Thank you, and I'll ask a question of Mr. Pallister. You know, there are many Manitobans who are worried about their jobs and concerned about the economy. And during this period of uncertainty, Manitoba Hydro can continue to move our economy forward and create good jobs. Yet with Mr. Pallister, we have seen Manitoba Hydro in chaos. His entire board, the entire board that he picked himself, quit on him. These are some very well-respected business people from here in Winnipeg. They said the reason that they walked out is because he couldn't find time to meet for over a year. Yes, and I'll get to the question now. For over a year, he couldn't meet. So my question for Mr. Pallister is, where were you? What were you doing that was so important you couldn't meet with the board of our most important crown corporation? Where were you?
Mr. Can you use the word chaos? That is exactly how the board that he just referenced described the situation that we inherited from the NDP. The NDP was using Manitoba Hydro as a vote-buying mechanism. They were treating it as if it was their personal ATM. And Mr. Canoe offered to give David, Shortrand $70 million.
Where were you that you couldn't meet with your
of
own board?
ratepayers' money?
Why couldn't you meet with
without even bothering to read the proposal? Yesterday, he proposed that everybody should get a rebate from Canadian.
It's a simple question.
That everyone in Manitoba should get a rebate from Manitoba Hydro.
own
He suggested
board.
that
They wanted
again,
to discuss the
I'm
issue.
trying to answer your question, sir. Yesterday, you suggested that Manitoba Hydro should cut a vote-buying rebate to everybody in the province when Manitoba Hydro is in desperate circumstances thanks to the overinvestment you made in things like the Bipole West line. These kinds of projects have driven up Hydro's
I'm very
debt.
excited
It will
about our
pass the
plan
province's debt
with
in just 4
Manitoba
years.
Hydro.
In 4 years, Manitoba Hydro will have a debt that is higher than the province of Manitoba. And now Mr. Canoe proposes a carbon tax on top of the massive debt that he created and the NDP created in Manitoba Hydro. Now, we've already paid. And Mr. Canoe's Canoe tax proposal will not make it stronger.
So again,
it will
we
make
are
it weaker, and it will make
And let Mr.
Manitobans
Canoe
weaker.
ask his follow-up.
Yes, we are proposing to give $350 to every Manitoban off your hydro bill. That will make it easier for you to transition to clean electricity. But the question was, where were you that you couldn't meet with your own board of Manitoba Hydro? We've also seen an inability to work with the mayor. We heard the chief of police for the first time ever call out the premier for not making investments in mental health and healthcare. So where were you that you couldn't deal with these important issues on meth, on hydro,
And give
on
him a moment to
healthcare?
answer.
Thanks.
here
I'd
for the
love to
people
have
of
the opportunity.
Manitoba?
If you'd like to pose the question, I'd like to answer it. Are you done?
Where were you?
Yeah. Okay. My record on building teams in business, in sport, in politics, compared to yours, sir, is something I welcome Manitoban scrutiny on. I have the ability to get the job done for Manitobans. You'll stand with Justin Trudeau on a carbon tax that will punish people for driving to work, but I don't agree with that, and we'll stand with
Your
Manitobans.
time is up for the answer on that one. Thank you very much, Mr. Canoe. The final question of our jobs and economy segment will be asked by James Bedham.
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you, Manitobans, for tuning in. My question is also for the Premier. Mr. Premier, there's a lot of signs of economic storms coming. We can see an inverted yield curve in the bond market. The Conference Board of Canada has downgraded the economic forecast for Manitoba. In the last you also called this election a year early. Would suggest that the reason you did that is likely because you aren't going to be able to balance the books. And beyond that, in the last election, you promised me that poverty was a priority issue for your government. Yet, the only declines we've seen in poverty in Manitoba are largely due to the Canada Child Benefit. And that just goes to show that cash transfers to the poor reduces poverty. Your government, in contrast, has done nothing. You've cut rent assist, and you've given tax cuts that benefit the wealthy. Mr. Premier, are you not willing to admit that implementing a basic income is the best way to stimulate Manitoba's economy because it puts hands in those who need it most, who will spend it in our economy?
You're quite right, Mr. Bedham, that we need a steady hand in the Premier's office in these uncertain times, and that is what I and our party and our team offer. Your observations on poverty, I know, come from a good heart, and you and I have talked enough that you know, and I know, that this is an issue that matters deeply to both of us.
I actually have a question.
Well, would I have the opportunity to answer your question, James?
Go ahead.
Manitoba's child poverty rate went down by 20% in just the last 2 years. Our overall poverty rate has reduced significantly. When we came in, we were the child poverty capital of Canada. We went from being last in child poverty, now we're fourth in Canada. We've made significant progress, and much, much more needs to be done. Mr. Bedham referred to the issue of a guaranteed basic income. What he failed to say is that this idea, which is not new and it has been around for a long time, as good-hearted as it may be, is somewhat naive in the sense that it would mean, if implemented, massive increases in taxes. Taxes on working families, taxes on seniors struggling to make a go of it with a fixed income. And so I recognize the earnest nature of what he wants to see us pursue, and I share that goal. But I do not think,
He does get a chance for a follow-up.
Well, certainly, I do not think that that plan would work.
Well, if you look at our plan, it benefits those that are making more than less than twice the low-income cutoff line. The reality is your plan, you want to give more to the families that are making more than 2 times the low-income cutoff line. The idea of a progressive tax system is that those that need the money most are the ones that should get it. Your plan of raising the personal income tax exemption benefits wealthy Manitobans more than poor Manitobans, and that's not fair and that's not right. Do you not agree, Mr. Premier?
No, I strongly disagree. In fact, our plan to roll back NDP broken promise tax hikes will put $2,020 on the kitchen table of the average Manitoba family. And families that are struggling to make ends meet, and we know that that's over half of our families that have less than $200 at the end of the month to spend, will benefit significantly from having the PST not charged to them for basic things like insuring their home. And that's the kind of savings we want to put back on the tables and in the homes of Manitoba families.
Thank you very
and once
much.
again, benefits the wealthy more.
Thank you to the 4 leaders. Now we turn the questioning over to our three journalists, each of whom will cover a predetermined topic. Let's go to Global 680 CJOB's Richard Kluche with questions about healthcare.
Joanne, thank you so very much. We begin with Mr. Bedham and the Green Party. Manitoba has been at or near the bottom in emergency room wait times and other services. What specifically is your plan to reduce ER wait times and the wait for diagnostics, and how much would that cost?
Certainly. We know that we've got to roll back the changes that were done by this government. The reality is, I can tell you, people in Fort Rouge, people in Wolseley are very bothered and very hurt by the closure of the Misericordia Health Centre. That's something that they relied on, that was within distance for them. Now they have to take cab rides for $20 or more each way. And it's not only the cost, it's the risk to people's lives. So we know that we need to invest in healthcare. We know that there's going to likely need to be further investments. What we need to do and what we need to realize is we've got to do what the Premier said he was going to do. Consult with frontline workers. The people in the front lines in hospitals, those are the people that have ideas and ways that we can save money and have a better healthcare system.
All right, let's pick up on that point. Mr. Pallister, fundamental, generational healthcare changes that we've seen, certainly in Winnipeg. If you're re-elected, more to come. I've spoken to nurses, doctors, technicians, and they say, well, in theory the plan works. The reality is that they're overwhelmed and overworked. What's your message to them, Mr. Pallister, and to those people that rely on those healthcare services that feel that, you know what, we don't like this change right now? What's your message to them, sir?
Have courage and recognize that these changes have been implemented across our country, that they do work, that the wait times in Calgary, in Vancouver, in Ottawa, and many other centers are half what ours were under the NDP, and we are going in the right direction. I have tremendous respect for the people who work in our healthcare system, and I want them to understand and know that better care sooner is the goal, and it's worth the struggle to get there. The people I know in the healthcare system, and I know many, want to see a system that works for patients better than the one that had us waiting longer than everyone else in Canada, that had us paying the highest.
So what do you think has gone wrong right now, though,
We've
sir?
lowered the ambulance fees by half. We are working very diligently to get these changes. The WRHA is working hard to make sure that we can see these positive changes, and they are starting to work. We've got the Victoria Hospital numbers, for example, our first one, where we moved emergent care to a central location and beefed up our central emergency rooms. And we know there that the wait times are down by 28%
Well, it gets
already.
us to Mr. Canoe and the NDP, because here you're looking at reopening the ERs at Seven Oaks and Concordia. And we all know that the most urgent cases, emergent cases, trauma cases, strokes, they go to one of the two teaching hospitals. So what precisely would occur under a reopened ER? What types of cases would we be talking about here? Because really, the reality is you need 24-hour staff diagnostics, because otherwise a lot of those patients get transferred to the two teaching hospitals anyway. So let's dig deeper on your promise.
Absolutely. I welcome the question. The reason why we need an ICU, an emergency room at Concordia and Seven Oaks, is because they are dealing with very serious patients with the kidney conditions at Seven Oaks and then the hip and knee surgeries at Concordia. But in talking to the nurses who are turning away patients from St. Boniface ER and are heartbroken about this, they've told me that we need to be smart and we need to be careful. So I won't make the mistake that Mr. Pallister has, and that is rushing forward with changes strictly for political purposes. We'll reopen these emergency rooms when it is safe and when it is right to do so, because at the end of the day, we want to make health care better for patients right across Manitoba.
Gets us to Mr. Lamont, and rather than rehashing the ER situation, I'm looking for light here. How do you see technology being used in healthcare in the future?
Technology is part of it, but what we need to do is invest in prevention, and that hasn't happened. One of the things, when Mr. Pallister says that these changes have worked across the country, that's simply not true. One of the main areas where it has worked is because of something we're proposing, which is patient-based funding, which means that we would actually be able to lift the cap, the rationing of hip and knee replacements that's happened under the PC and the NDP. It isn't necessary. And those provinces that have done that have the shortest wait times for hip, for knee replacements, for glaucoma. And some of this is actually making sure that we're listening to people who work in the hospitals and focusing more on community care so people get the care closer to home instead of it being hyper-centralized as it's been under the PC.
Can we pick up on the point about prevention?
Well, and certainly on, and Mr. Pallister, I'm interested on the technology side simply because we all have paper healthcare cards. I talk about dragging the system kicking and screaming into the 1990s. What are you going to do to address the future of healthcare now and on the prevention side as well?
Well, let's go back to something Mr. Lamont said for just a second. We're doing a record number, and we've invested significantly, a record amount of investment, $414 million more this year than the NDP ever invested. And we're doing a record number.
But it's
of
been
hips,
frozen, let's be
of
clear,
knees,
it's been frozen for the last 3 years straight.
No, it is not true.
It is absolutely true.
No, it is not.
It's in your own, it's
Well,
in your
no
own
matter how many
budgets.
times,
I was
Mr. Lamont,
invoked.
you state
I'd like
it,
to
it
jump
doesn't
in,
make it
if I
true.
might.
Record number of hips, record number of knees, and we're going to improve on that. We're also improving in the drug procurement side and cooperating with other provinces, something
then
the
why-
NDP
Mr.
never
Canoe,
did.
go ahead.
Yeah.
This is important.
Okay, again,
Canoe.
Mr. Pallister, it's not just about the amount of money you spend, it's about the quality of care that you deliver to the patients. And unfortunately, under your time as Premier, you have grown the healthcare bureaucracy. You added shared health. What we need to do is we need to listen to the experts at the front line, the doctors, the nurses, the healthcare aide, and we can use technology to replace some of a very bloated...
We've already trimmed
Joanne, we've just
15%.
scratched
We've
the
already
surface
trimmed
on
15%
healthcare. I
off the
thank you
top of the
all on the
services.
healthcare side. A lot more to come.
Thank you, Richard. I can see they all have so much more they want to say, but we're now going to CBC's Marcy Marcusa questioning the leaders on the environment.
Thank you, Joanne. My first question is for the leader of the Green Party, James Bedham. You said you would ban all unnecessary single-use plastics and ban all materials that can't be recycled. How can you possibly keep that promise when the reality of that is you need industry to buy in at all levels, not just here in Manitoba, but across the country, and no one, despite best efforts tried elsewhere, has come close to that in Canada?
Well, A, let's be a leader and let's move forward. I mean, we have islands of plastic in the oceans that need to be dealt with, microplastics in our bodies. So there's a real issue. In terms of dealing with it, there's a lot of ways that local industry could be actually thriving under such an arrangement. The reality is if the major companies aren't willing to make the changes that are needed, then local industry will step up, and Greens are all about supporting local industry. So the end reality of creating a better recycling stream, the reality is we've created a very unsustainable international recycling stream, and we need to create a much more localized economy, and inside that is aiming towards a zero waste economy.
How would you start though here in Manitoba? Have you had discussions with industry at the level? Do you have do you actually have a belief that you can see that this is something that would be moved forward on?
Yeah, I think it's something, well, there's some places where we easily can move forward with the plastic bag ban. We could move forward with bans on single-use plastic. So that's somewhere where we could start moving forward in a number of years. On some of the broader issues, we can look at extended producer responsibility provisions so that the person that produces the product is responsible for disposing at the end of the life cycle of that product, which therefore gives the producer more incentives to create more recyclable products and products that are easier to be refurbished.
I'm going to move to the leader of the Liberal Party, Dougal Lamont, now with a question about his plan. You have a lot of environmental incentives at the personal level in your Green Plan. What about big polluters in Manitoba? How will you tackle reduction of their emissions?
Part of that has to be done through basically through a cap and trade system. Because we actually have a fairly small number of polluters who are like that. But look what we want to achieve is to address a whole bunch of things that have not been addressed for 40 years more in Manitoba, including action on climate and action on Lake Winnipeg. And we by far have the most aggressive plan. It's actually a bolder plan than the Green Party in making Manitoba a carbon neutral by 2030.
Quickly, though, to your action on Lake Winnipeg question, part of your funding for the North End treatment plan for the city of Winnipeg is to have a whole bond system set up to have the public pay for bonds to go towards that. If you believe in cleaning up Lake Winnipeg to that degree, why not just make that a clear commitment and borrow the money and make that happen?
Well, that's what we're doing.
You're creating a system, though, to get the money through a bond system from the public.
No,
You're not putting forward that $500 million as a promise.
Well, no, we absolutely are. No, the difference is we're just saying that if we release this issue of $500 million in bonds, this will be dedicated absolutely to Lake Winnipeg. And we have an absolute commitment to doing it.
We're moving to Mr. Pallister. What are you offering in your Green Plan specifically to change personal consumption behaviors of Manitobans?
Yeah, thanks, Marcy. First of all, I back up for a second and say, I come from a small farm southwest of Portage la Prairie. I was raised by people who understood, as they were raised by people who understood that we're stewards of our resources, of our soil, of our water, of our air, and of our animals to protect them too. And so this I bring to my heart as we work on our plan. And we developed a Made in Manitoba green strategy in consultation with literally over 10,000 Manitobans.
But a lot of what's in there are big initiatives to
They
sort
are,
of for
but-
wetlands and such. I'm asking
Yeah.
for incentives for people. What's going to make people get out of their cars? What's going to make people get on the bus? What are the personal initiatives you're offering in there? Because you're not in favor of the taxation, as we know.
I'm not in favor of the carbon tax as a penalty for people driving to work or for heating their homes in the winter, no.
Well, you were
But he was in favor of it in the last
We'll let
election.
him finish, and then we'll go to Mr. Bedham and Mr.
I
Lamont.
tried to work
Actually,
with
I'd like to
Ottawa, and
jump
I was
in.
our view was rejected by Mr. Trudeau. That being said, he said we had the best green plan in Canada, and I think he's right. But Manitoba deserves, and Manitobans deserve to be respected for their green investments. And we have already paid billions of dollars into hydro, and we are going to have to pay for decades to come. So on the incentives,
Yeah, 10 seconds. I must go to Mr. Canoe.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Marcy. I just want to say that I think the important thing here is to educate and to get our children more involved in the environment itself. I think that's a big part of this. The best way to create an environmentalist is the way I think a lot of us became environmentalists and conservationists.
Mr. Canoe.
Walk around a pond.
To your question, you haven't had a
outside,
question yet, so you need a
experience
question
nature.
for fairness and balance. I have to move here. Leader of the Manitoba New Democratic Party, this $350 rebate on hydro bills, help me understand how it makes sense. Is that not just promoting wasting energy?
Absolutely not. I know a lot of families across Manitoba want to build a safer, a cleaner, healthier environment for our kids to grow up in. The thing is, life is getting more and more expensive for many of us, and they want help getting by. So if we provide this rebate, $350 off of each of your hydro bills, not only are we providing that incentive, we're going to make it more attractive
But
for
how
you
is
to
it an
make
incentive
your
if
next
it's not-
vehicle a hybrid or an electric vehicle.
If it's not targeted. You said earlier this evening in the debate that the money would make it easier for people to choose green energy.
That's right.
But you're leaving the choice for where they spend that money up to them, and that really, up to this point, why not make that a targeted promise?
Because I think it goes back to the affordability question. The average family wants help making the environmental choice, so we'll leave it to you to decide whether you want to weatherize your home with new windows, switch to a new furnace, maybe switch to a hybrid. But as Mr. Pallister said, we have hydroelectricity in this province. Let's use it. Our plan does
Last
this.
20
and
seconds, I'm
does
going to
give
go to
an
Mr. Bedham,
opportunity
Mr. Lamont,
for
just
families
because
to
we
make
have that much
switch.
time, and I'd promised them those speaking. Mr. Bedham, first for 10.
The feds have been clear, economists are clear that carbon taxes are the way to reduce emissions. The $350 credit is the same as the credits you're sending that Mr. Canoe's proposing at hydro. It's
We'll
just
take your
going to
rebut,
promote
and we'll
wasting
let
of
Mr.
energy.
Lamont rebut
And
to what
why-
Mr. Pallister
I do
said,
want to
and for
comment, though, Mr. Pallister, you had carbon pricing in your last platform.
Mr. Bedham,
and you've given-
we're going to
We
just
gotta move along
We're
here.
going to move
Yep.
along for our last 10 seconds to Mr. Lamont.
Look, this is one of the most important issues for me. I have an 8-year-old boy who comes into my bed at night and he's scared about what's going to happen with climate change. We need to take action on this, and we by far have the most aggressive plan.
That's the end of
I
our
will say the
segment on the
NDP,
environment.
NDP plan is a disaster financially for
Okay,
hydro and
we
is
are going
worse
to move
than
on
the
now to let
PCs.
Jeff,
Thank you.
CTV's Jeff Keel. He's got questions for the leaders about crime and addictions. Jeff.
Thank you. Mr. Lamont, you're promising to create a provincial police force to replace RCMP officers.
Yep.
Do you feel the RCMP is not doing a good job in rural Manitoba?
They face incredible challenges, and some of this is just that there are large areas that aren't covered. But I'll give you the example of a fly-in reserve called St. Teresa Point. There are 15,000 people who live there. There are no roads. There's no roads, there's no railway, there's no boats. And the RCMP are on an island. So part of this is not just to provide and replace RCMP, but to work with First Nations police forces to respect their sovereignty and to provide trading. But the whole point is that we actually have high crime rates in rural Manitoba, and we have to make sure that people are safe, and that's not the case right now.
You're suggesting, though, that this could be cost neutral, but wouldn't you need vehicles, equipment, startup costs? Would you pay these officers less than Mounties are making? How would it be cost neutral?
Well, I mean, part of it, we've actually talked with people who are involved, and that if you look at how much, say, the Ontario Provincial Police cost or the Newfoundland Police cost, they actually managed to hire more officers for the same amount of money. And some of it is that we're paying extra to Ottawa for RCMP police forces. So, I mean, we go much further than that, but part of this is also having a dedicated organized crime unit, a dedicated drug unit. Make sure that we've got Indigenous policing so that people are
Thank you, Mr.
are
Lamont. I'm sorry, I have to move on to Mr. Bedham. There are people watching this debate tonight worried about their garages maybe broken into, their cars, their homes. Property crime is on the rise, in part related to the meth crisis. What would the Green Party do specifically to curb property crime? There's a lot of people worried about it in this city.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. I'm certainly hearing it from many residents in my riding in Fort Rouge. Without a doubt, we need to deal with both policing strategies, but more importantly, we need to deal on the prevention side. We're not going to simply be able to police our way out. That's simply a situation where we're moving the problems away. So we need to get to different root causes. Addiction affects across socioeconomic classes, but there certainly is linkages with poverty. Beyond that, we need to reduce friction in the system. Right now, there's delays and gaps in terms of getting people to access addiction treatment. We need to make sure that we move them along quicker. Beyond that, we need to create more beds and more spaces. And I recently had an opportunity to tour a facility that the Premier himself closed down, and the government's paid $80,000 on, and I'm told by experts could be 10 possible beds to deal with the meth crisis right now. So we have plans, but you've got to deal with the supply side, not just the demand side in terms of the policing strategy.
That's a nice segue, Mr. Pallister. We're hearing about Winnipeg police officers at risk of burning out. Bear Clans found tens of thousands of used needles. Some of the critics on this stage have said you've been slow to respond to the meth crisis. How will you help the city of Winnipeg fight crime and the related meth crisis specifically going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, we've invested initially already millions of dollars in opening 5 rapid access to addictions medicine clinics throughout the province. We've expanded hours of operation. We've tripled the amount of women's treatment beds. We've joined the Government of Canada's Emergency Treatment Fund. We've joined forces with our federal and municipal government partners to build a plan, and we're acting on that plan. But what's missing from my colleagues' observations on this is public safety. It's not even mentioned in the NDP platform document. And we need to also make sure that we invest in support of our police. And so we have a plan in respect of that we'll be initiating. We've also called upon the Winnipeg Police Commission to investigate best practices in places like Minneapolis, where people feel safer in their downtown areas. Better cooperation among police is key to that, but better coordination of surveillance, better lighting. There are a variety of things that they've done there that we need to institute here, because people deserve to feel safe when they are going shopping in downtown Winnipeg for a present for someone or going to a Jets game. We have to invest in the police
Some health
side.
experts say that part of the solution is a safe injection site. You've said you don't believe they don't work. You've got about 20 seconds. Why don't you believe they work?
Well, because not an expert in the world has set up a safe injection site for meth.
That's not
They
true.
are set up for opioids, for sure, and I've talked to Premier Horgan in BC, and he feels confident that that could work in their area where there's concentrated use. But in Winnipeg, it's not an appropriate course of action.
That leads me to my question.
The NDP has said they want to have drugs more easily accessed by drug users. We want to help people get off drugs. We want treatment.
No, I welcome
And
the
Mr. Canoe, my question leads
focus.
into, I'm sure, your response. That is part of your campaign to deal with methamphetamine, is a supervised consumption site. Police Chief Danny Smythe and Marion Willis from St. Boniface Street Links have both said they're not sure, as Mr. Pallister's point, they're not sure that will work for meth, maybe other drugs. Why do you feel, what evidence do you have that that is one of the solutions for the methamphetamine crisis?
Well, the reason why we need a safer consumption site is because right now people are using the bathroom at Tim Hortons as their injection site. And I'd much rather see that transferred to a place with health care, with access to detox and treatment. Jeff, it is used actually in other cities like Lethbridge, Alberta. They're open to both opioid and meth users. Right now, there is a crisis on our streets, and Mr. Pallister is not responsible for the crisis, but he has failed to act, and that has made the situation worse. We need immediate action. That's why we will act within the first 100 days with detox, with harm reduction, and with mental health supports so that we can help the police get back to what they do best, keeping us safe in our communities.
Very quickly, I want all 4 of you to answer this. We've got 20 seconds. Edibles are coming. Will you allow consumption in public, or will you ban it? Yes or no?
In public?
Yeah, consumption.
For edibles, no.
Mr. Pallister. Edibles, consuming them in public, would you treat it like smoking?
Sorry, Jeff. Yeah, we're going to follow, but we're going to lead as well. We've developed
Yes or no?
a system.
I've got to move on. Yes or no?
Fine. The best system in Canada for distribution of cannabis.
Mr. Canoe.
Edibles only if there's child-proof packaging.
I think yes, but I think we're missing a business opportunity for licensed establishments to serve marijuana products.
Okay, perfect.
Bit of a curveball there.
Thank you so much to the 3 journalists, Richard, Marcy, and Jeff. In this next segment, the leaders will have the opportunity to question another leader on a topic of their choice. And we start with Green Party leader James Bedham. James?
Mr. Canoe, prior to becoming leader of the NDP, you served as a spokesperson for numerous tar sands companies. Your climate plan is to basically hand out $350 to have a $20 carbon tax that doesn't increase. You have no targeted initiatives whatsoever. Are you willing to admit that you're not concerned about climate change? You're just concerned about addressing the affordability of Manitobans?
Actually, Mr. Bedham, I was at Standing Rock as a sitting MLA. And I take very seriously the climate crisis. And what I've been hearing from the young activists on the climate crisis is that they want a movement. They want leadership that is going to bring everybody in our society along to address this climate crisis. Now, Mr. Pallister, the only thing he's done is launching lawsuits against the federal government. I still haven't met anybody in Manitoba who thinks that a lawsuit is going to help fight climate change. So what we want to do is we want to provide this rebate on your hydro bill, giving you more money in your pocket so that you can afford to make a transition.
So are they going to spend it on more fuel?
You can begin to switch to a hybrid vehicle, switch to an electric vehicle, weatherize your home. The choice is up to you. We already know that the climate activists are ready to make the change, but I also want to build a movement that includes the people who are still sitting on the sidelines, who think that, yeah, we got to do something about the environment, but I need a little bit of help at the end of each month. And so our plan is designed with that person in mind. So if you have been looking for climate leadership, this is it. We are going to bring everyone in our society along so that we can make a better tomorrow for all of our kids.
It would be laughable if climate change wasn't such a serious issue. There's no way of knowing that that $350 isn't just going to be spent on some form of further polluting activities, Mr. Canoe. Your climate plan has no initiatives, no targets. You're not looking at electrifying transportation, which could reduce our emissions by 25%. You're not looking, you mentioned people better insulating their houses, but $350 isn't necessarily going to achieve that.
Yeah, we need to get to a question here.
It's likely going to result in people wasting more money. I mean, you're not giving anything credible, Mr. Canoe, with respect to your climate plan.
So what is your follow-up question?
Yeah.
I don't think there needs to be a follow-up question. Go ahead and respond, Mr. Canoe.
All right, with great pleasure. We are committed to meeting the targets under the Paris Climate Accord, the science-based targets, which Mr. Pallister is not committed to meeting. We also want to help save our lake. We want to help save Lake Winnipeg by committing from infrastructure funding directly from government to building the North End sewage treatment plant. And again, our approach is to modernize Manitoba Hydro so that it actually becomes a renewable energy company. We have this tremendous resource here that could be creating good jobs for everybody right across the province.
10 seconds.
A job creation plan, to me, is another great motivator to get people to address our climate crisis.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Bedham. And now to NDP leader Wab Canoe.
Thank you kindly, Joanne. I'll ask a question of Mr. Pallister. Mr. Pallister, while you were Premier, I met a young man named Devin who is living with cystic fibrosis. Now, in spite of that terrible condition, he's realized one of his life's dreams in proposing to his fiancée. Thing is, when you cut the special drugs program, Devin had to postpone his wedding. They had to use that money to pay for his life-saving medication. And there are stories like this behind every cut, whether it's in physiotherapy, cancer care, the ERs, and so on. So my question is this. Mr. Pallister, there's an election. Now you're claiming to have billions of dollars for health care. But who can believe you this time when it comes to health?
Everyone, because we've kept our word. We ran for election saying we would strengthen our services, which were dead last under the NDP. We have. And we need to do more. And the commitment to do more is real. $2 billion additional, in addition to the record funding that we are providing for healthcare right now. But it has to be put in a sustainable manner. And the NDP doubled our debt while our services went downhill. And that's not sustainable. We've inherited $1 billion this year for the first time in Manitoba, $1 billion of debt service charges that I'm answering your question.
The question is about health care.
The NDP left
and with respect,
$1 billion we don't have for health care. $1 billion we don't have for health care thanks to the NDP. And now Mr. Canoe has the nerve to tell Manitobans that he can provide better care. But the fact of the matter is the NDP gave us the worst care in the country, the longest wait times, the highest ambulance fees, and now he says he can be trusted to fix the system the NDP broke. We are going to invest in health care, and we're going to make it better.
That's not what I'm hearing.
It's not easy.
From the
Mr.
nurses
Canoe wants to go backward.
on the front lines.
He's going to give up.
That's not what I'm hearing.
He's going to give up on the farms,
There's
and
absolutely
he wants
no
to go
excuse for
backward.
Mr. Canoe has time now for a follow-up.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry, Mr. Pallister, but I don't think anyone believes you when it comes to health care. Because that's not
Mr.
what
Canoe,
I'm
quite
hearing
frankly, I don't think anyone
from
believes
the
you.
nurses
Mr. Pallister, let
on
him
the
ask his
front
question.
lines. Again, the nurses are telling me that health care in Manitoba is worse than it's ever been. And it's no wonder, because there have been cuts to physiotherapy, cuts to emergency rooms, cuts to cancer care. Nurses are leaving their professions, and they are worried about the care for their patients. That's why we're proposing a smart, new approach to healthcare that will see us listen to those who work on the front lines,
And Mr.
reduce
Canoe,
the
if you could get to your
healthcare
question, so
bureaucracy,
Mr. Pallister's
and
time
again,
ends.
modernize healthcare services. So again, my question is simple. There's a crisis in healthcare because of the decisions you have made, Mr. Pallister. Who can believe you this time when it comes to health?
The NDP had all the advice that was followed in other provinces that led to shorter wait times and better care sooner for patients there. They did not have the courage to act on it. This government
Sometimes courage
this government has.
means
Let
the
him finish, Mr.
courage
Canoe.
This government
We've got
has,
5
and it
seconds.
will.
courage to admit you got it wrong.
The fact of the matter is, Mr. Canoe wants to go backward at a time when we're beginning to see improvements in our system,
Thank
and
you.
we'll continue to.
Thank you, Mr. Canoe. Now to Liberal leader Dougald Lamont.
I'll just say that there's nothing courageous about cutting life-saving drugs, which is exactly what the Premier has done, or about implementing an NDP plan to reform Manitoba's healthcare system. For Mr. Canoe, 4 years ago, you gave an interview with Maclean's magazine during the last federal election, where you said you would agree 100% with a fiscal conservative platform, and then 4 months later, you joined the NDP. What changed?
Well, what I was talking about in that interview is that I very much identify with families who have trouble making ends meet at the end of the month, who are concerned about affordability. And I take very seriously when I speak to seniors in my community who time and time again ask me, Wob, what are you going to do for seniors? We're on a fixed income and everything is getting more expensive. And it's no surprise because under Mr. Pallister, they have seen their hydro bills go up. Autopack has increased, and again, the never-ending spats with the city of Winnipeg have led to higher property tax bills and even higher transit fares. So we want to keep an eye on affordability. We want to make life easier in Manitoba. That's why we're bringing forward real commitments like bringing in free parking at hospitals, like taking $1,000 off the price of your first home. And yes, of course, we want to ensure that your Manitoba Hydro and your Autopack payments stay affordable and stay cheap. That's why they're public Crown corporations.
And you've got time for follow-up.
I would follow up just because in terms of being fiscally conservative, your platform has $200 million in cuts in the first 4 years. Your early childhood education plan will take 30 years to actually clear the waiting lists. And I'm not quite sure, when does your $15 an hour minimum wage kick in? Because I know previously you said it was in 2024. Are you doing it earlier, or people still have to wait 5 years?
So, Mr. Lamont, with all due respect, we've brought forward a balanced plan. We put out our fully costed platform right at the beginning of the campaign. And the reason that we've done that is simple. I've heard from you Manitobans that you want a balanced approach. And so again, with respect, Mr. Lamont, the answer to Mr. Pallister's extreme cuts is not extreme spending. It's to find a path that's balanced, a balanced approach to the books, but also balanced when it comes to healthcare. Balance when it comes to tackling the climate crisis. And of course, having an approach that listens to all the voices at the table, whether that's business, community, or whether that means listening to those voices of marginalized people. So I want to be a premier that's here for all of us in Manitoba. I want to fix healthcare. I want to create 50,000 good jobs using infrastructure investments. And of course, I want to bring about an affordable quality of life for all of us in Manitoba.
Thank you, Mr. Lamont. Now to Progressive Conservative leader Brian Pallister.
Yeah, Mr. Canoe cares deeply, he says, about the money on your kitchen table because he wants to take it off there and spend it and get credit for spending it. 15 tax hikes under the previous NDP government in just 14 years took money right off the kitchen tables of Manitoba families, right away from seniors, and he won't answer a simple question about how he's going to pay for a $2 billion plus series of promises in his platform because he knows the only way he can pay for it is through increased taxes. Now, the fact of the matter is we don't have a money tree outside the legislature, and so we've moved our budget towards balance. And the good news for Manitobans is we promise to do that in the second term. Just as they have to balance their budget, we believe the government should balance its budget, and we will do that 2 years ahead of schedule. So that means that we can now work from a position of strength, not weakness, not doubling our debt, not seeing our credit ratings downgraded, not seeing reductions in key services.
Your credit
we
ratings
saw
were
under the
downgraded
NDP.
twice
The
under
fact-
you.
And is there a question here, Mr. Pallister?
Yeah, there is, but I'd appreciate not being interrupted, as I did not interrupt you, sir. Yeah. So my question for Mr. Canoe is the same as before. Sir, you've made $2 billion of promises conservatively in your platform, and you haven't said a word about how Manitobans are going to pay for those. So I'd ask you again, how are you going to pay for those promises? Are you going to raise the PST? Really?
Well, with respect, Mr. Pallister, I know that you rehearsed this question, but I've already answered it. Again, we put out a fully costed platform at the outset of the campaign, and it's there for anybody who wants to look at it on our website, mbndp.ca/for-all-of-us. But what I'm hearing time and time again is that Manitobans are concerned about healthcare. They don't want cuts, as we've seen with Mr. Pallister. They want to see a smart and comprehensive, safe approach to improving healthcare. And so that's why we'll modernize our healthcare system by listening to the experts on the front line, but we'll also focus on prevention. Doing things like adding physiotherapy coverage so seniors don't be injured after they have surgery. We also want to reform the way we look at EIA and rent assist, so we start looking at housing and poverty prevention as healthcare initiatives.
Yeah, I would appreciate Mr. Canoe addressing the issue I've raised, because I think it's important to people. Half our families have less than $200 of discretionary income at the end of the month after they pay their bills, and a lot of their bills are due to the NDP's mismanagement, let's be frank. So what we are doing as a platform item for ourselves, continuing on a strategy to leave more money at the kitchen table.
I need to give Mr. Canoe time to answer. Please get to the question. Yeah.
What we are doing is endeavoring to balance the books and lower taxes at the same time, and we are. Mr. Canoe doesn't want to take responsibility for the NDP records. Let me ask him again. The NDP record was 15 tax hikes in 14 years. Most of them after they gave the same answers. They promised they wouldn't do it.
Again,
promised they wouldn't raise it.
This election
10 seconds left. Let Mr.
Give
Canoe
the same answer as Greg
Healthcare.
Selinger gave.
Now, gentlemen.
Exactly the same.
Mr. Pallister, let Mr. Canoe answer.
You know, I respect the fact that Mr. Pallister and his team prepared these questions, but I've already answered them many times. We're going to keep life affordable. We're going to move towards balance, but along the way, we're not going to cut healthcare. We're going to fix healthcare. We're going to hire more nurses.
Okay, and we've got to wrap this up.
We're going to provide better coverage to everyone.
Thank you,
in
Mr.
Manitoba.
Pallister. And now each leader has 45 seconds for a closing statement, and we'll start with Mr. Bedham.
It's time for a new voice in the Manitoba legislature. It's time for a party that's going to put forward bold vision and real solutions. We're putting forward a plan for a basic income that would cut poverty rates in half. We will take real, meaningful action to address climate change. Only the Green Party of Manitoba can be trusted with this important file. We humbly ask Manitobans to take a look at the Green Party, www.greenparty.mb.ca. We have more candidates we ever ran before, 43 candidates, including, I want to make sure I acknowledge Dave Nickers in Wolseley. We're seeing Greens elected across Canada. It's time to elect Greens in Manitoba. You can trust the Green Party's bold vision. We humbly ask for your vote.
Mr. Canoe?
Thanks for tuning in. Again, this election is about health care. Do you want more cuts, as we've seen with Mr. Pallister, or would you like to see us implement our smart new plan? We're guided by families like the one I spoke to in Gimli, who just welcomed a beautiful baby girl at St. Boniface Hospital. Thing is, when they got to the waiting room, it was so packed that Mom had to go lie down in the car in the parking lot through her contractions. Now, after the baby was born healthy and inside the hospital, I would add, they compared it to the birth of their sons born at St. Boniface before Mr. Pallister was Premier. They said it was like giving birth in two different countries. I think we'd all agree which country we want to live in, and that's why I'm asking for your support.
Thank you, Mr. Canoe, and now to Mr. Pallister.
Oh, thank you. Well, we have an exciting plan to move Manitoba forward, and we keep our word, as opposed to others. We have a plan to lower taxes on Manitoba seniors, on working families. We have a plan to create jobs, really, to shorten wait times by investing $2 billion more in health care in the coming term. And we have a plan to build 20 new schools because our children deserve to learn in something other than portable classrooms. We'll create 40,000 new real opportunities for Manitobans as we grow our economy together. And we will defend the future of this province by standing up for Manitoba's record, not joining with Justin Trudeau on a carbon tax to punish people for getting to work. and for taking their kids to soccer or hockey. We'll move Manitoba forward because we deserve better, and we are going to get better as we move forward. Better prosperity
Thank you. And final
security for all.
statement, Mr. Lamont.
Thank you so much. I got into politics because for too many people around Manitoba, life's been getting harder bit by bit. I talk to people who haven't had a raise in decades and people who are really concerned about whether they can put food on the table or whether they can pay for their medication. I hear from this over and over from seniors. And what I've heard tonight, for the most part, is a lot of lip service and repetition of from two parties who are really feel entitled to the fact that they've been in power so that they're the only choice. We've put forward a bold plan on climate, on crime, on justice, on education.
And I'm sorry, that is all. We are literally about to run out of time, just a few seconds left. So thank you all, and please remember to get out.
Which camera are you looking at? This one?
All right, thanks for joining us. I'm Bartley Kivas, reporter here at CBC Manitoba. Kristen Annable. Kristen, what did you get out of that?
Well, it was a pretty fast 50 minutes. Like, it all went by really fast. People were pretty fired up at times, but other times, you know, Brian Pallister was pretty calm, I thought, for most of it. What did you think?
I think we heard primarily talking points that we've heard before from all four of these leaders. Well, particularly Brian Pallister, Wab Kinew, and Douglas Lamont. I mean, what I've typically been hearing in all this is the same things they've been saying throughout the campaign, and I didn't get any sense of anything new. The one tiny little piece of almost incremental news was when Jeff Keel from CTV slipped in the question about edibles, and James Bedham from the Green Party managed to say, I think we should be doing more with the opportunity to sell cannabis in licensed establishments. And, you know, I guess if Mr. Bedham had a better chance of forming government, he has more candidates than ever before, that would be even bigger news. But for me, that was like the biggest piece of news of policy that I got out of this on the policy side.
Yeah, I don't think I actually heard anything in terms of new policy. We heard Brian Pallister say things we've heard him say before. Stuff about, you know, giving more money on the kitchen table of Manitobans. We heard Wab Kinew talk a lot about healthcare. Sort of the same things we've been hearing throughout the campaign.
Hello, Marcy.
Hello, Marcy.
How are you doing?
Good.
How was that for you?
You know what, it was interesting being in, oops, I'm just getting set up here.
She was just, well, you saw her in the debate.
Yeah, you know what, being in the studio was interesting. I think it went fast. It went really fast. Nobody was sure who would ask questions of whom. And, you know, Mr. Pallister did take opportunity to ask Mr. Kinew questions, which right off the hop, you get your those two engaging, which was interesting. I would say that there were moments just being in the studio. I don't know if it came across, you know, for viewers watching. There were a couple of moments where Mr. Kinew asked repeated questions of Mr. Pallister over and over to try to gain an answer. Mm-hmm. And there was probably only one moment in the debate where I heard Mr. Pallister's voice really elevate. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to, you know, often when you watch leaders in a debate setting, they kind of try to get that engagement moving and get that fiery moments happening. Never quite happened. Everyone, I thought, kept their cool. But there certainly was a lot of back and forth. Some questions, though, we didn't get answers to. So
Most questions.
There
not
was a
many.
number, yeah.
there sure were a number.
I mean,
yeah.
when Canoe kept asking, where were you?
Yeah,
He
the
was
opening
trying to
question.
raise the specter of Costa Rica, I believe, and the amount of time Pallister spends there. Of course, the reality is more to affect the other criticisms we've heard about Brian Pallister with regard to him not meeting with people, but I guess that's what he was driving at. I don't know.
So I walked in, you guys were already analyzing, so forgive me if you've already answered this, but for you, Chris, like, was there a moment tonight? Did anyone win the debate?
You know what, I was jotting down notes as I was going, and I just didn't hear anyone come across as the clear winner. I thought that Dougald Lamont came off I wrote this down. Dougald Lamont was very scholarly, he was very researched, he was very sort of on point with facts. I thought Bedham was very fired up. I thought he came off as very passionate. Canoe, he was rehearsed, he was polished, he was looking at the camera the whole time. And then Pallister, he was calm, he was ready, and I could tell they were trying to poke him, but he really, I don't think, bit on any of the things. I don't know, Bart, do you disagree? You seem to have a face.
No, I have a face only in
Yeah.
that. Only in that. I mean, we expected. Everyone expected all these leaders to go after Pallister. They did largely.
Yeah.
Although a couple of times Lamont chose to go after Canoe in an attempt to outflank him on the left, especially with the question
agree
about why did you tell Maclean's one thing about liking a fiscal conservative platform, and then later on join the NDP. It was interesting that Lamont saved some of his fire for Wab Canoe and the NDP. I mean, they are jockeying down there for, obviously the NDP are in most recent polls far higher than the Liberals, but I was surprised that Lamont wouldn't try to whittle down Pallister.
So let's ask about the two things that did come up repeatedly by on the journalist panels, but then also by the leaders among their own questions, between themselves. And they were, I would say, for Mr. Canoe, it came up repeatedly, this rebate of hydro of $350, that how is that possibly a green commitment, was asked by myself, but also then sort of came back a couple of times. And then Mr. Canoe repeatedly saying this whole election's about healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. Do you think that an average Manitoban watching out there learned anything new tonight, or saw any of the leaders as being champions in either of those areas?
Either of the areas of healthcare and the environment? Or?
Do you think that the point around healthcare, like how did Mr. Pallister to you come across when it came to his defense of the last 3 years of what the changes have been in healthcare?
I think that when Pallister says, look, the NDP didn't do a great job, Manitobans have a very long memory of NDP time in office here. So that's an effective thing for him to say. I mean, remember, voters here typically elect a party and stick with that party for a long time. There was approximately 11 years of PC rule followed by 17 years of NDP rule. So voters still remember what they consider perhaps bad times under the NDP, not necessarily economic.
Because they were there for 17 years.
17 years.
Well.
They're probably willing to give it's an effective, deflecting isn't always a great strategy, but on this particular point, that I believe is an effective strategy.
May have
for
resonated
Pallister.
tonight. It was certainly repeated by him.
And I would agree with that. I think that Pallister did a good job. He appeared to do a good job of sort of saying, these changes had to happen. The NDP had 17 years to do it, and they didn't do it. So yeah, there's going to be, and he said this before, there's going to be a little sort of, bad things along the way. But we had to do this. And I believe he said somewhere, there was a really good quote about, you have to have the courage to do it. And he said, we had the courage to do it, and the NDP didn't. And I think that maybe, to the viewers, maybe took some of the wind out of Wab Canoe's sail when he was talking about, healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. On the flip side, though, there was a lot of times where Wab Canoe was bringing up specific problems that nurses or doctors have brought up about the healthcare system, and we didn't really get straight answers from Pallister on those topics.
Can I ask just how you felt that you both felt they came across in terms of their styles? Because leaders come into debates and they sort of choose different styles. I found that Mr. Pallister was going to sort of repeated phrases that were sort of right from the campaign. We heard about the money on the kitchen table.
Twice.
Yeah,
maybe
3 times.
I was to say,
maybe
three.
I think there was
one.
one in the closing. Mr. Canoe, on the other hand, took the approach of, he shared, I think there were 3 times as well, personal stories. I met someone in Gimli, I met someone, they were healthcare stories. Do you think that, how did that come across in your view as sort of tactical in the debate? In terms of who came across better, given the different choices?
I wonder about how Mr. Canoe came off with, he interrupted. Pallister quite a number of times, and he talked over Pallister a number of times. I don't know if that would be viewed as somebody trying to get an answer or somebody that's being maybe a little overly aggressive and they wanted to hear more of the answers. So I'm kind of curious of how that approach translated. What do you think?
I don't think that worked out very well for Mr. Canoe.
Yeah.
I think it made him look like, I think it was really interesting. He and Pallister both did the same things in that asked one question, I'm going to respond with a talking point, and then mention another policy that has nothing to do with the question at hand. That's the problem with debates and the problem with political, when reporters are in scrums these days, people watch these things. They see that you ask a question, you get an answer about something else, you try to bring them back on point, and you journalists, you tried to do that. I have a question for you, Marcy, and it sounded like at the end there, where Pallister had the chance to ask his question at the end, that he was asked to get on with the question. Was it Joanne Kelly, the moderator, that he chided, saying "Don't interrupt me"? Or was that somebody else on one of the other leaders who butted in?
No, he was. If it came across that way on camera, it actually wasn't Joanne. It was it was Dougald Lamont who was on the other side of him.
I tweeted this. I'm going to have to correct that.
Yes, so it certainly was not Joanne. It would have been Mr. Lamont, if my memory is serving correctly. I know it wasn't Joanne.
Okay.
So he was interrupted by another leader. It was Mr. Lamont.
Okay,
for
then
sure.
that is.
It's interesting though because in the studio that was clear, and I didn't realize it wasn't on the shot that showed all of them, right?
The way the whole thing is set up for people who are not watching, they were to Pallister's right was Mr. Lamont and then the moderator. All right.
So let's see if we got to any of what you care about, what you've been writing to us here at CBC about in terms of on Facebook, or we had some previous Twitter events where we were asking people, to write in questions. So some of the questions I would say were addressed in maybe different form. This one was from Caribou Smith on Facebook. Had you guys read these out before I popped over?
No.
No, we hadn't had a chance.
Live
Sorry.
live blogging.
No, that's good. So I'm not repeating.
Yeah.
Okay, so this says, where were you, Mr. Pallister, when all the families were asking for help with addiction and mental health, the sad outcome of people in crisis, leaving hospitals and ending up dead? May they rest in peace. Since no help was afforded to them by your government, they promised you. The ending is a little bit confabulated, but it says something to the effect of that now sickens me, that you weren't there to help them out. So thank you, Caribou, for writing to us at CBC. Lots of moments where Mr. Pallister, where other leaders tried to hold him to account on those types of situations. Of course, is it effective, do you think, when you hear about a mother and having contractions and going back to her car to have them the closing statements? Or
I was going to answer this one also when you asked about bringing the personal statements. I believe that the vast majority of viewers are so sophisticated when they watch politicians talk, when they bring up these personal stories, they know this is a story brought out. These are completely, on one hand, these are legitimate stories brought forward by people. These experiences by these people are real. There's no doubt in my mind. At the same time, they're handpicked to make a political point for the politician in question. And therefore, I kind of think, just like everybody knows when they're being marketed to on the internet. Everybody knows when that email comes and they've won money somewhere. They know that this message is tailored. These people are sometimes, I'm not saying they're being co-opted, I'm not saying they're being taken advantage of, but they are being used for political points. And it's more interesting when we hear those stories between elections, in my opinion.
A cheeky comment from John Waite here. It speaks to, we were talking earlier about the question that didn't get answered at the beginning of the debate. Where were you when the board was trying to meet with you? We had John write, I'm worried Mr. Pallister doesn't actually know where he was when the Hydro Board wanted to meet with him. He just couldn't answer the question. So clearly that moment, though, of not answering stayed with this viewer. And we have one more comment to share here before we continue talking. And this, I think, actually is interesting. Tara Brown wrote to us. She says, wow, I thought this was a provincial election. I'm hearing so much about Winnipeg.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
There was quite a bit about Winnipeg, but I think probably because of the ER closures and the funding cuts. But there was a little bit of rural healthcare discussion, but in all of the sections, it probably was a lot about Winnipeg.
Third of the population outside the capital region.
I think about it. I don't think I heard anything about Winnipeg, which is actually a question I was thinking. What do you think was missing in this debate? Because one thing I noticed is, they did not bring up Wab Kinu's past, which is something that we've seen in progressive.
In the ads.
Yeah,
I was surprised
that was not touched on. Yes. They didn't touch the words Costa Rica, were not said by anyone.
Although implied in the where were you question, it's meant
but not said. It was, I guess, on the nose. But what else do you think was sort of missing?
Well, I was expecting a big reveal, a big moment, a bomb. Sometimes in these debates, one party leader will try to bring out something that that the audiences and reporters have never heard before, voters have never heard before,
was none of
and we don't have a chance to really fact check it live. It just gets repeated online and over the airwaves without and nobody took advantage of the ability to just make that, to drop that bomb.
I thought there was a little bit missing, and maybe this is just because when you talk to voters, they want to know what kind of a leader you're going to be. No one really took a moment either in their start or in their closing statements to talk about why they should be premier.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you see that in debates. Sometimes you see the no one really grabbed that to show. Took a leadership moment. There was more sparring over the same things we've heard in the
Technically, the Greens did in their own way, in the sense
I
in the
humbly
closing,
ask you.
humbly ask you, and
Yes.
Mr. Bedham at the end basically, look, we know they're not. It's highly unlikely the Green Party, with only 40-something candidates, is 43 is going to form a government. But he put in a plug for Dave Nickars in Wolseley, who is the Greens' best chance. He took advantage of this broad, 3 television station, multi-platform format to do that. That was his version of saying, look, you can elect a Green here. There's a Green in BC. There are Greens in BC and PI. Let's have one in Manitoba. That was a kind of version of that, given that he knows he's not likely going to be premier.
Were there gaffes tonight? Were there missteps? We talked about maybe the lack of a moment of a winner necessarily. Like nobody really, though, getting too flustered, little raised voices back and forth. Maybe Mr. Canoe cutting off people, or cutting in, and how viewers will see that. They'll have to decide if whether it's strong or the opposite. But were there any gaffes? Were there any moments that you think leaders might want to pull back?
I don't think there was any by Pallister. I didn't, and that we've seen a few times where he has put his foot in his mouth, right? And that didn't happen. I would say for Mr. Lamont, it wouldn't be a gaffe, but I don't know if we saw a lot of passion out of him.
It was like the second coming of John Girard. He used to always have, the Liberals under Girard often had, people would say, this is the best policy, and then parties would win and then take their policy and implement it. It was almost, it's interesting in that he is carrying forward the honorable Girard tradition there.
Yeah, because this is really, I think, the first time some Manitobans maybe even saw Dougald Lamont, if they're not always tuned in, and maybe they're tuned in for this. He's still a relatively new leader.
Trying to think of the other leaders, the Stéphane Dion at the federal level curse, the Stuart Murray maybe at the conservative level. It's the curse of the smart policy makers that,
or the nice person,
but that maybe are they coming across as a leader?
Well, and I think I think Dougald had to spend a lot of time explaining his policies because his policies are, somewhat convoluted. They're not necessarily the ones that are easy to understand, like a $350 tax rebate, which has its, there's questions around that, but it's easy. Whereas, your question about the bonds for Lake Winnipeg, like he had to spend time explaining that because
why his approaches. But then he said he'd support cap and trade, which is actually, if we had a full interview, I may have asked him some follow-ups.
I do have to give Dougald Lamont credit though for having the best single zinger in this. It's like what early on, like just as the one-line question, reminded me of when Dan Van Dow was on City Council. He used to drive Sam Cates crazy with these zingers. Why did how is firing people going to help the economy? And it's kind of like it's a leading question. It's not really fair, but it was a good zinger.
Right.
Zinger moments, I'm not sure. I wrote down a couple of lines and phrases that came out. Mr. Pallister referred to the NDP reign in Manitoba as crazy land, and we're not going back to crazy land.
Crazy land in terms of infrastructure spending in particular.
Spending, yes, and I thought that might actually, I don't know if that's a line he's used before, but that stuck out for me.
Yeah.
And actually, back to Mr. Lamont, I actually had one which is when they were talking about the tax rebate, and he said the NDP plan is a disaster for hydro and worse than the PCs, which was Dougald directly attacking not the sitting government, but
And actually, Mr. Lamont also early on during some question about tourism, also I wrote down said where were you to give money to Churchill then? If you're high on tourism in Manitoba, which also was a one-liner. So he had a couple of moments.
Yeah, maybe we're not being, I was just, maybe
we're not being, maybe now
well, we're all thinking about it. I mean, again, we're sitting, hey, you are watching us, the debate just ended, and we're digesting this as quickly as viewers is. So, viewers are, excuse me. Apparently grammar is also going out the window for me. But when I look at these, I feel like there wasn't an enormous gaffe and there wasn't an enormous win. I know that people often complain that these debates are predictable. At the same time, I appreciated seeing all of them up there together. And I guess mostly taking the high road, relatively speaking. given some of the things that have gone on in this campaign?
No answers for my section. I mean, I know that I had hoped to hear a little bit about the personal incentives in the Green Plan, because a lot of us have heard about the politics of the PC's Green Plan, and they have made some promises, in fairness, this week that are on a bigger level and an industry level. But I didn't get an answer to any personal incentives.
Yeah, I had that in my notes as well.
So a couple non-answer moments.
I really actually want to go back and listen to the tape, because there was this moment where Pallister said something about, when you asked him about these incentives, are you going to offer any incentives? And he said something about walk around
He's
a
used
pond.
that before. He used
What
that
does
before.
that-
Okay, so the very recent announcement that he was talking about adding $50 million to the $154 million for wetlands conservation.
Okay.
There's two separate funds. Interest from that funds gets paid in a dividend. Basically, it's rent to landowners to keep wetlands as wetlands. Good policy that anyone would acknowledge. When he was asked about the best way to create an environmentalist, it's to have somebody walk around a pond. It's the personalization. That's what he meant. Now, in the not knowing the context of his wetlands conservation announcement, that could have come across as odd. So, except for the 5 journalists who covered that announcement,
Right.
that might have sounded like a non sequitur, but I guess I knew what he was driving at.
B wrote to us at CBC Manitoba, the candidates are spending their time bringing down Pallister instead of showing us why we should vote for them. So the incumbent always gets, more questions in a debate format, of course, but it sort of does speak to what I was saying about, the moment where you're going to tell people why you should vote for them. So B was writing into us. And Volker Beckman wrote in, what's the big deal about banning plastic bags? Thompson did it years ago. It's really interesting where all of the plans are huge, but to that point, some of the smallest things still haven't happened here in Manitoba's largest city, like banning plastic bags.
Yeah, but it's interesting. This is complete. You want to talk about non sequiturs? I remember reading something interesting on the line saying you want to ban plastic straws, and people who are differently able do not want.
Right.
Can lose their straws. We can't automatically create top-down policy without.
Well, and I think that was sort of the word ban, right? Limit, change, give options. Bags at grocery stores. We did see, of course, one chain start with that, I think, this year. But I take your point about the straws. But any movement on anything has not been. The environmental plans for all of these parties are very, very big. And, of course, the environmental problem is very big. But, yeah. Now, was it satisfying in terms of a format? As watching, did you get enough of leaders going back and forth, or did they not take their opportunities where they could have to add their follow-up questions when they were in those segments, do you think?
I think it was a satisfying format. I think it was good to see the questions, the leaders ask each other questions. And we were actually discussing before the debate started whether Pallister would ask Canoe questions and whether Canoe would ask Pallister questions, because sometimes leaders will take the opposite tactic, where they'll actually turn and ask, like James, they'll ask the Green leader a question, just to sort of deflect from bigger sort of arguments may happen.
Remind me, in the civic election, did Mayor Brian Bowman ask his chief rival in that election, Jenny Mocklick? No, I think he went to other candidates.
He did exactly
Yeah.
that. Yeah, he chose other candidates. And actually, we had, in fairness, this is just behind the scenes, we had the cameras all set up because you kind of presume that the people that are going to ask, and he went to someone completely unexpected. So that didn't happen here.
Nobody held up a football as a prop in this one. I'm really disappointed.
No footballs, no.
There's no props.
And not 10 people in a circle. It was before we went on camera, actually, we were talking about what music everybody chills out to. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can ask that of the leaders, actually. They all had answers. And the only reason I'm not sharing it here is because I can't remember all of them. I remember 3 or 4. So I don't want to get the songs wrong. Or it'll be insulting. That'll be a good one for you guys going forward in the campaign.
Did anyone name check Lizzo just to try to, current? No.
No, none of that, none of that. Here's another comment here, just to go to one more here from the audience. This is sort of a generic feeling that came in from a number of people, so we're not going to name who said it because it came in from a whole bunch of people. The debate was not long enough to truly get into the issues and their ideas.
Fair and unfair.
Okay.
Fair in that, we moved through a lot of issues really quickly there. You moved through a lot of issues very quickly there. I can't say we, I wasn't in the room, I wasn't involved. But on the other hand, 50 minutes of network television time on 3 networks is a huge amount, a block in this day and age, especially.
Without any commercials.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, no, I said it was going to be the last one. We'll have another one.
That's why you can't run for office. Marcy Marcusa promises the last question. Can she deliver? No.
I have have a director who tries to get me to ask a last question all the time. Never works. Tyson Beasley wrote to us, and this is clearly Tyson is looks like supporting the NDP, but he says, why doesn't the NDP remind Manitobans about the $600 million flood bill that they were left to find money for during Salinger's reign? Harper was supposed to send flood relief payments, decided not to make that happen, and then the NDP didn't have that money come
Fascinating.
through.
Jacques Marcoux, our data journalist, and I were arguing about this very point before the debate. We were arguing
About why they don't bring it up? Or
about why can we fairly say the NDP did bad job as fiscal managers? And Jacques Marcoux mentioned, well, there was this $1 billion budget hit, not all of it got paid back by the feds. I piped in going, yeah, but earlier on in this millennium, there were all these years with budget surpluses, and the doer NDP had a prosperity benefit, and instead of restructuring the government to better prepare themselves for bad times, they didn't take advantage. So is it a wash? I don't know. Jacques and I did not agree on that. To the point where we're preparing a fact check for online, and we didn't agree on that point. So that's a valid question to raise.
So here's a follow-up, though. I wasn't in the room when you guys had this conversation, but if you raise that, do you then just look like you're passing the buck off to say, well, the feds didn't help us, so we couldn't possibly balance the books? Are you then just opening it up to everything else you spent money on anyway, and then you're going to get attacked from that side anyways? That may be why they don't raise it, or do they? Because clearly they have enough strategists in the room to understand that that could be raised as a point of defense.
Yeah, I think it would be maybe too easily construed as being making an excuse. Right, and no politician wants to be the guy who's just making excuses and passing the buck. And I think it's maybe just too easy of a line for Pallister to fire back on, because he's quick, right? Pallister's pretty good at, he many times he picked on cues when people would say certain things, and they said the word chaos. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I gotta say, governments are elected to govern and make the tough decisions, and saying, hey, we can't handle the tough decisions isn't a good look for any party.
We have run out of our questions. Let me ask you guys: where are you on election night? Where are you going to be?
I'll be with the NDP.
Okay, and Bartley?
I'll be with the PCs.
Final thoughts on tonight or moving forward as we head into the last few weeks here of the election campaign? We're going to get over Labor Day. People are going to start to engage in earnest now.
Right. So sort of our thought process has been after Labor Day is when things are going to really heat up, right? Because everybody knows that people are away at the cabin in August, people are doing stuff. Everyone's going to be back after Labor Day. School has started. And there's sort of that idea that over the Labor Day weekend, you talk about politics, you talk about an election. People are with their families, and then they're going to come back with ideas. And that's when I think we're going to see maybe a bit more of the gloves coming off and a bit more aggression this election.
Dissenting opinion mildly. I think generally you're right, but also people are getting their kids back to school. I don't know how much time I'm going to have to think about that.
Not everyone has kids, Bart.
I don't have kids, but there's a lot of people who do, and for those folks, they're really busy, like figuring out school supplies and books and classes and transport, and hey, maybe there'll be a transit strike to make it all that much more fun.
How likely is it that we get last-minute policy announcements now, or have they said their piece already as we head into the final?
We have 2 weeks left. Calling it last minute, we're basically at the halfway point.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's 28th.
It is.
Yeah, I guess I don't know what's going to happen this weekend, but I think we will still see policy announcements, and they're going to be the ones that they want people to go to the polls thinking about. I don't know what they're going to be, because the PCs have almost made an announcement every day. So I don't know what's coming next, but there's going to be big ticket items.
On that, I am actually shocked that they are making, frontrunners don't usually go out with all this policy. Granted, they aren't all huge announcements, but I'm shocked how much they cannot be accused of not reminding voters there's an election on.
We've just been given our 2-minute signal. I thought it might be uglier. This is just my impression. I actually thought it might be a little bit uglier tonight.
Same.
We talked about some of the ad campaigns and such, and some of them have been pretty personal, and some of those comments, leading in, we mentioned the criminal record ads about the PCs, about Mr. Canoe, but also then, of course, Mr. Pallister's comments about privilege, and all of that just sort of developing. All of that was, it wasn't ugly tonight.
I would agree.
Using privilege in the legal sense, nobody wants to libel somebody on live television. Well, that's like, I didn't intend that to be a mic drop, but
it was a bit of a mic drop.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they thought that deeply about that.
I'm sure they would think that you just don't want to look too mean on TV.
I would say, okay, I think that's more of, I think,
well, he wasn't going to repeat it, obviously. Yeah. Pallister wasn't going to repeat it, but Canoe did nothing with it, is my point. Could he have done something with it? He could have done something with it.
I don't know.
People don't like ugliness in politics anymore, though, right? We're hearing that a lot. People want
They
optimism.
do, yeah, but then look around the planet. Well, is this time for the Wayne and Schuster song for everybody over the age of 50?
Oh, God, please no.
Okay.
I think this is time to ask you to write to us. So thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Bart.
More than welcome.
Election night for CBC, of course, September 10th. We're going to have full coverage. Right now, if you want to write to us and let us know what you thought of the debate, I'd sure love to know. I know tomorrow morning on the morning show, we're going to be looking for your comments. Winners, losers, what was missing? How was it for you? What wasn't asked? Was there a subject area that you thought we heard nothing about that you were really craving to hear? You can write to us. You can tweet us at CBC Manitoba. And tune in, watch, and vote on September 10th. We will.